It's going. All right. Well, good morning. We are here today to talk about mission-driven financing institutions and what they do to support small businesses. My name is Orlando Watkins. I serve as Chief Program Officer here at the Boston Foundation. And I like to do a few thank yous before we get started. I always like to thank our events team. I'm not going to say everyone's name, but led by Michelle Hinkle. We do a number of these types of gatherings and convenings, and they always come off without a hitch. So thank you to that team. I also want to thank my team, Sony Gupta, who's Associate Vice President. Of course, Courtney Brunson, who is the leader of our business equity work, and this event and so many exciting things the foundation will be doing is a part of Courtney's vision. So if you don't know Courtney, you got to know Courtney. I also want to thank Alexis on Courtney's team who helped to organize this event, get me ready today as well. And then lastly, Tony Rust. I don't know if Tony's in the room, but Tony is, and Tony and I have been partners for 7 or 8 years around the Business Equity Fund, which you might know about. He is the fund manager for that fund and has done some amazing work investing in entrepreneurs of color in the region. So thank you to the team, and thank you all for being here. As we know, small businesses are a vital part of our community. They create jobs, they provide critical services, they invest in local neighborhoods. And for many entrepreneurs of color, small business ownership is a way to build wealth and accumulate assets. But the other thing we know, and I talk about this a lot, is that when those entrepreneurs of color who come from our communities have success, they tend to go on to be amazing civic leaders as well. We see it over and over again in the entrepreneurs that we've invested in. They do well. Most of us are one generation out of the communities that we're talking about here. They want to invest back in communities. So there's so many reasons for the Boston Foundation and all of us to invest in the success of our entrepreneurs in small businesses. Yet we know that not all entrepreneurs have the opportunities to start and grow their businesses. The obvious one we talk about a lot and we're talking about today is the lack of access to capital. Flexible, patient growth capital, often hard to come by for some of our entrepreneurs of color. But there are other barriers, right? There are access to mentors and networks, access to quality technical assistance, and others. There are plenty of barriers that prevent many of our entrepreneurs from achieving their greatest potential. And this is where I think these mission-driven financing institutions really matter a lot. Tony Rust just came in. I shouted you out earlier. You missed it. Fund manager for the Business Equity Fund. Appreciate you, man. But I've had the great privilege to work with a lot of these institutions. And beyond capital, they build deep trust with entrepreneurs. They build deep trust with community. So they're able to not only provide capital, but really sort of understand what these businesses need to be successful. And so we think at the Boston Foundation that these mission-driven financing institutions, CDFIs is a more common one we know, but there are others you'll hear about today, are really important to how we're going to strengthen this ecosystem and really grow our businesses. The Boston Foundation has been supporting this business ecosystem more broadly for over a decade. Probably over the last 7 or 8 years, we've invested about $6 million in business support organizations. We've funded really important research to elevate the importance of entrepreneurs of color and our businesses in our community. We have funded advocacy efforts to grow the amount of public investment supporting the business ecosystem. So this has been a really important part of the Boston Foundation's work for almost a decade now. And beyond the grant making, we've done a few other things, one of which, mentioning Tony Rust again, is we launched something called the Business Equity Fund back in 2018 with a lot of important partners. Glenn Lloyd, I don't know if Glenn is here, Bob Rivers at Eastern Bank, Quincy Miller over at Eastern Bank. And we launched this fund to provide flexible growth capital for businesses of color who are ready to scale, ready to grow, but just didn't have that sort of traditional capital access. And I'm really excited to say that after 7 or 8 years, we have deployed $20 million, which has resulted in about $80 million in revenue growth, resulted in nearly 2,000 new jobs. And of course, we haven't done that alone. It's been through partnerships. Our DAF community has rallied their own capital to do some really interesting, innovative investments in these businesses. And so really proud of that work, all of the work we're doing. But now moving forward with rising costs, I was just speaking to someone about the pressures that our businesses are facing because of rising costs, brutal federal legislation that's making it even harder for not only businesses in our community, but others in our community. The Boston Foundation is asking what next in this business equity work. And we think these mission-driven financing institutions are going to be a really important part of how we think about our work going forward. So tremendously excited about this panel to talk about these organizations, hear from the experts in this space, as it will help to inform the future of our work. So again, thank you all for being here and being a part of this movement. If you're in the room, you're a part of the movement, so thank you. There we go. All right, hey, let's go. But now I want to introduce my friend, Matt Brewster. Matt has been an incredible partner to the Boston Foundation in this space. I think, Matt, you might have been the second consultant I hired maybe 7 or 8 years ago when we started doing this work. You have brought your full heart to this work, which I really appreciate. So Matt Brewster, principal at P2 Advisors, longtime partner of TBF, and Matt will present his findings on the impact of the recent attacks on the CDFI fund and the impact that's having on our small businesses. So Matt, why don't you come on up, man? Almost got emotional there, man, thinking about you. Thank you, man. All right, man, cool.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Orlando, and thank you, Sony, Courtney, and for the foundation overall for supporting this work for so long. It means a lot to me, and I know to many others. I'm excited to have the opportunity to be kind of an opener, a hype person for the real talent to talk about deploying capital to the small businesses that Orlando talked so much about. And I'll jump right into it. I always think it's really important to start with the entrepreneur's perspective to ground the conversation, to add some numbers to what Orlando shared, and you'll hear more about in a little bit. And the headline here from a lot of work we've done is that entrepreneurs of color in Massachusetts have 2 times the rate of financing shortfalls and over $1 billion in unmet financing demand on an annual basis, so every single year. On the left-hand side of the chart, you can see the results of applications for financing across a number of different lenders. So business applied for a loan during a year, applied to 1, 2, 3, might be 4 different sources. This is their best outcome that they achieved. And you can see it varies by racial subgroup, but across entrepreneurs of color, it's between 2 and 3x the rate of complete denial, let alone financing shortfall, that they only got part of what they were asking for example. So if we take those experiences and multiply it times the entrepreneurs of color who applied for financing, we get 2 unmet demand numbers. The first is 600 million in unmet application demand, those who submitted an application during a trailing year. There's also, we estimate, latent demand of around $400 million in change. And this is from those who didn't apply but indicated they didn't do so because they were discouraged or deterred. Some said, I'm good, I have the capital I need. Others said, I didn't apply, I need capital, but I'm afraid of the cost of capital is too high. I'm afraid I'm going to be denied, etc. So if we look a little deeper and start to investigate, well, why is that? One of the first places to look is at the largest sectors serving businesses in general. And well, what we see here in summary is that traditional financing institutions do not effectively reach entrepreneurs of color. And on the left-hand side, we'll look at banks, and the right-hand side, we'll look at venture capital, so debt and equity, 2 sides of the capital markets. On the bank side, what this chart shows on the left is the rate at which small business loans make it to businesses in neighborhoods that are majority people of color. And it compares that with the rate of entrepreneurship in those communities by people of color. And you can see that there's quite a disparity there. 10% of loans go there, 18% of the population. As a side note, we don't have perfect data on bank financing by race and ethnicity. It's a great research opportunity, legislative opportunity. So on the right-hand side, we can look at the equity markets, and here it's even more stark. And this looks at the percentage of venture capital dollars in Massachusetts that goes to Black and Latinx founders versus the portion of the population. It's most acute for Black or African American founders, who receive just over 0.5% of the financing dollars and represent over 9% of the population. So enter mission-driven financing institutions as one of the prominent, most promising go-forward answers to filling those gaps. And within the broad category of mission-driven financing institutions, we're going to specifically talk today about community finance institutions, defined as those who are federally certified as community development finance institutions, or CDFIs, or those who are certified at the state level as community development corporations, or CDCs. There are 21 of these institutions across the Commonwealth, you can see mapped here, that support small businesses. There's a concentration naturally in and around Boston, particularly given the concentration of underserved small businesses, but they're all across the state. And in stark contrast to what we looked at with the traditional financing institutions, if you look at who they're serving, they disproportionately serve business owners owned by underserved populations. 70% of clients are low income. 50% are people of color. Contrast that with what I just mentioned on the other sources, right? And then 47% are owned by female entrepreneurs. And we did a little analysis on the right-hand side. It's a little complex, but just to boil it down, the rate at which community finance institutions in Massachusetts serve people of color is even greater than the national level, because these institutions as a sector are focused on that, but even more so in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Unfortunately, the sector of community finance institutions that serve small businesses is relatively small, especially when we compare it to the demand and need for their services. The left-hand chart shows you the rate of small business financing per small business establishment in the Commonwealth compared to the national average. And you can see that we're 5 percentage points behind just what the national average is. The middle chart shows you the rate at which small businesses in Massachusetts who were seeking capital, so this is a survey, shout out to Massink Polling Group for doing this great work to get the small business owner's perspective. First question, did you apply for financing in a given year? Yes, okay, among that group, where did you apply? Did you apply to a CDFI? Only 4% said that they applied to a CDFI, which is pretty striking for the entrepreneurs of color particularly, and if you look at the satisfaction rates at the right-hand side. The satisfaction rates of clients of CDFIs is head and shoulders above banks and certainly above fintechs, a subset of which are predatory or known to be. While it's small, the sector has grown significantly in recent years and is poised to accelerate its growth. Here we're showing data from 2023. This is based on a deep dive study we did in 2024. So it's a little bit old, but directionally still holds true. So in the trailing period that we looked at from 2019 to 2023, originations to small business by these institutions grew over 100% on a compound annual basis and reached just under $40 million annually. We also looked at how effective these institutions have been at deploying the capital they receive. And the industry benchmark for this is called the deployment ratio. And to boil it down, basically what it tells you is of the total dollars that an institution has that it can use to finance small businesses, how much of it is lent out, right? Versus how much is sitting on its balance sheet. And the deployment ratio for community finance institutions in Massachusetts, almost 80%, far above that nationally. So that indicates two things. They're effectively deploying the money that they receive, and they're prepared to deploy more, which gets to the right-hand side. We asked a carefully worded question of the leaders of these institutions. If you had unlimited funding of the type you have now, important qualifier, not just like free money with no strings, but same restrictions on grants, same cost of capital on the loans, same duration of the debt, how much could you grow which reflect how much could you ramp up from an operational point of view and how much could you expand given the pipeline that you see. And this is where they told us they could accelerate growth and reach almost $100 million year 3. And that's a growth rate of 150%. So they're prepared to accelerate growth. But what do they need to do that? So just to level set on what these institutions need generally, CDFIs require a unique mix of grants and impact investments to fuel their work. They need grants for operations. They need grants for loan loss reserve and other credit enhancements, and potentially some for lending as well. The impact investments are clearly for the financing capital. And on the left-hand side of this slide, want to point out a fundamental reality about these institutions, which is that only a portion of their budgets in a given year are supported by earned income from their loans or investments. At national level, it's about 50%. In Massachusetts, the sector actually outperforms that. It's 14 percentage points higher, so they're more self-sufficient. They earn more a percent of their budget, but still, the fundamental reality is that 44 cents on every dollar of a CDFI's budget comes from grants, whether it be from the federal sector, state, or private or individual sources. And back to the perspective of the leaders of these organizations, all of them reported challenges securing the funding that they need. About a quarter said they have significant challenges, and then 3/4 said they have some challenges. No one reported having no challenges. So as Orlando teed up, we thought it was a good time to talk about what's unfolded over the past 14 months at the federal level as it relates to the CDFI fund. The CDFI fund, many of you may know, is a part of the U.S. Treasury. It's what certifies these institutions as having a mission and being accountable to their target markets. And it's also what provides them core backbone funding. And despite the success and impact of these institutions, the current federal administration has taken a number of actions against the sector. First, right out of the gate, January 2025, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, froze funding that had already been awarded. So the CDFI fund had said, hey, you CDFI, you're awarded X million. You CDFI, you're awarded. They said, nope, we're not going to give you the money to give to the CDFIs. So chaos, like uncertainty. You have executive directors like, wait a minute, where's my money? I was awarded it. To this day, OMB is still holding on to that money. Then in May of 2025, the administration proposed a federal budget that would essentially gut the CDFI fund. That was their stated intention. They reduced it from 300-something million to 33 million, only to maintain core operational funding so that it could wind down. They expressed intent to eliminate the fund. Then in October of last year, during the government shutdown, one of the longest we've seen in this nation's history, the Office of Management and Budget laid off the entire CDFI fund staff and again renewed their intent to eliminate the CDFI fund. We'll come back in a moment to what unfolded in the response to that, but this trend led us to do some analysis to really understand what is the impact of the CDFI fund, particularly on the community finance institutions that serve small businesses in Massachusetts. And what we found on the operational side on the left here is that 38 cents on every operational dollar from CDFI comes from the federal government through the CDFI fund. So 38% of these institutions' budgets are at threat right out of the gate. And then we wanted to look at, well, what is the leverage effect of this federal funding? How can we demonstrate how catalytic it is and critical for the sector? So we looked at the average annual CDFI fund award to these institutions relative to the deployment, how much money they put on the street. And there's a 10x multiplier. And what that means is for every federal dollar that goes to CDFIs, they get $10 out to small businesses and entrepreneurs to do their work. And they do that by leveraging private capital from banks, foundations, individuals. And this federal money is critical to catalyze that because it's flexible, unrestricted funding. So it's no surprise that there was a great defense mounted of the CDFI fund. In response to OMB freezing that money that had already been awarded, there are a myriad of lawsuits, some of which are still pending, some have been unsuccessful, and that's the big thing that remains open right now and actually bears on the rest of it as well. The other thing that's really important and neat to highlight is that in response to the continued note of ending the CDFI fund, there was a Republican-only, bicameral Senate and House letter written to the Treasury and the administration pleading to continue support for the CDFI fund. That was strategic. Obviously, the Democrats are all in on the CDFI fund, but what the sector wanted to show is that there's bipartisan support here, and that the districts that they serve are affected by this as well. Ultimately, just a month ago, the federal budget passed, maintaining the prior level funding for the CDFI fund, which is excellent news in the near term. I want to be clear about that. The fight's not over for the sector because the prior year still hasn't been awarded, and you have institutions waiting for their funding, and OMB could obviously do the same thing with this new funding. And more broadly, they're messaging their intent to eliminate the fund has cast obviously a big shadow of uncertainty over the sector that necessitates investigation and exploration of alternative models, many of whom we'll hear from today. Lastly, we wanted to end on a highlight of some really innovative, creative efforts to complement the federal funding from the CDFI fund and tap other resources. And the one that I'll share in a little bit more detail that hopefully is inspiration for some creative thinking around this is actually the state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And this chart is the motivation that they had for creating the fund, which I'll describe in a moment. What this looks at is, for a trailing period of 5 years, what portion of CDFI fund awards went to institutions that serve small businesses, those 21 that I showed across the Commonwealth, compared to other sectors like affordable housing, community facilities. It's only 18% of those dollars go to institutions that support small business. Now, obviously, I think everyone in this room knows that there's an affordability crisis in Massachusetts, and it's really important to fund that affordable housing work. And it's crowding out to some degree the support for small businesses. The Commonwealth realized this in response to input from the sector and structured a fund, $20 million over 4 years, that was explicitly for CDFIs that serve small businesses, with an emphasis on those that support underserved and entrepreneurs of color. Widely noted as a success by executive directors who received the funding and deployed it to small businesses. Unfortunately, that fund has been depleted. It used COVID-era funding to do that. Now Mass Development is where the agency, Mass Growth Capital Corporation that ran it, lives. They'd love to do it again. But it also punctuates this conversation with an opportunity for the private sector, banks, corporates, foundations, individuals to pile on to creative capital pooling efforts to support these institutions in different ways, particularly as community finance institutions aren't the only institutions doing this work. And it also uplifts the importance of alternative models, a couple of which we'll hear from in just a moment. So with that, I will hand it over to Courtney to introduce the panel to talk more about the actual work.
Okay. Just coming up here to say thank you to Matt and invite all three of my panelists to answer some of the questions I'm sure you have in your head from that presentation. So Josie, Daniel, Allegra, you can come on up. Okay, I think we can dive right on in. I know so much of what Matt covered was specifically catered towards talking about CDFIs, but we were really thoughtful in making sure the representation on that stage was broader than that, partially to demonstrate that the issues that he highlighted are felt across the small business ecosystem, and to highlight all of the success that each of your organizations are having in supporting small businesses. So with that, Each of you bring a different strategy to this work. We have community-based co-ops, mission-driven venture capital, and entrepreneurship via business acquisition. Please introduce each of yourselves, tell us a little bit more about your organizational strategy and how your work both supports and impacts business owners and communities. And Josie, I'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. I am Josie Shagwart. I work with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, and we are a regional community loan fund. We work in the seven state region, so 6 states of New England plus New York. We have good roots in Massachusetts, though. This is where we were incorporated, and 5 of our 15 staff work here, and about 30% of our loan portfolio is capital deployed to Massachusetts businesses, housing, and foods that are organized cooperatively. Yeah, maybe I will leave it there and I'll pass it.
Leave
to
them
you
wanting
and-
more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was a teaser.
Nice teaser. I'm Daniel Achampo, and first I just want to say thank you all so much, and particularly the Boston Foundation for having us. And Matt, that was incredible. I was trying to absorb all that information. So I'm one of the general partners and co-founders of Visible Hands. And what we do is that we're a venture capital firm where we're backing teams, primarily diverse teams that are building technology businesses. And we look at a lot of different sectors. By the way, I keep seeing friendly, new friends. So
It's a convening of friends.
Yeah.
The panel is just a formality.
It's great to see you all. And we're backing teams that are building technology businesses, with the perspective of venture scalability, that they can become massive businesses. And we look at a lot of different sectors, but there are a few that we really deploy our kind of research resource to and organizational partnerships with. And it tends to be focused in financial security and healthcare. But for us, the main focus is that finding great talent. And if you see great talent that's doing an incredible job in bringing this idea forward, how can we bring resources, financial capital, and also the other means of capital from mentors, networks, helping them think about how to grow and scale the businesses. So excited to share more about that.
Absolutely. Allegra.
Hello, everyone. I'm Allegra Stennett. I'm one of the co-founders of New Majority Capital. We are an impact investment firm and nonprofit focused on business acquisition. And so I'm curious how many folks in the room have heard about the silver tsunami? Okay,
Look
great.
at that.
I'm
It's
in
a good room,
company.
right?
So for those of you who haven't heard about it, in the next 20 or so years, 12.9 million businesses will be available for sale. These are passing down from baby boomers. And these businesses have one of 2 options. Either they will sell or they will close. And we're currently in what's termed the small business closure crisis. And so we are addressing that by training entrepreneurs to acquire businesses, these small businesses rooted in communities, and then also by funding them through our fund, making equity investments in an entrepreneur-friendly way that will also address our impact mission, which is to address the racial wealth gap in our lifetime. So I'm happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah. See, I'm already excited and I know
Yeah.
what you all do. One brief follow-up with you, Josie. We're talking about just different capital systems and the way that businesses and business owners in particular can generate wealth. But I'm curious if you can just give a crash course on the benefits of cooperatives in particular and supporting wealth creation more generally and for communities of color in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. Cooperatives are a vehicle whereby folks can do more and accomplish more together than they could as individuals. And so it's an incredibly flexible model because cooperatives can be formed as a small business, housing that's collectively owned, food cooperatives, and that's actually where CFNE's roots come from, is in the food co-op movement. In the 70s, there was a resurgence of communities that wanted access to healthy food in their communities and something community controlled. And they were coming actually to the Haymarket People's Fund in the Northeast, and at that time itself, I think recently formed in the Boston area. And they were looking for grants because these were communities that didn't have the access to the friends and family kind of capital that you need to start a business. And so the folks at the Haymarket People's Fund very clearly saw these are businesses and they could support debt. It just needs to be structured for the cooperative model, which is shared ownership. So the worker, in this case, usually consumers would own the business of the food co-op. And so they suggested, I think you need to start a community loan fund. And so the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast was born, and we started out with $60,000 of investor money. And we grew from there to focus not just on food co-ops, but small businesses and housing.
Yeah, that's exciting. You're very casual about the 60,000 to where you are today, but I'll leave you to.
Thank
mention
you.
the numbers
I
again.
know I'm missing a lot of tricks
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
$60,000 originally to $61 million portfolio
That's
across
incredible.
the
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's what I was waiting for.
Thank you, Courtney. I know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And beyond capital access, and I know that's a focus of our work, but as Orlando highlighted, each of your institutions also provide technical assistance and relationship-based support. Can you just spend a few minutes, I'll start with you, Daniel, on why this comprehensive approach is necessary when supporting entrepreneurs and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Often when we meet founders and they're telling us about their business, the first thing that we hear, when we ask them, what do you need? The first thing they'll say is capital. But I think sometimes they miss the other parts of it. The capital is so important, but then how have you built a business before? And if you haven't, who are the folks around you who've taken this idea from 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 to help guide you and give you really, really honest perspectives? So we want to make sure that we spend time with the entrepreneurs around those models. So we have several fellowships that we run. We have one in Boston here. We do it in partnership with the Bar Foundation, where we identify about 15 to 20 entrepreneurs. And we receive hundreds of applications, people who are building all kinds of things. And with this, we say, all right, so this is what you're doing. What are the things that you need to go from 0 to 1? So now let me identify people within our network who can help you with that. And we tailor that around founder health, their mental health and wellness, to make sure that, being an entrepreneur is so lonely. It is a hard job. So having people around you to say, hey, I got you. It doesn't always have to be about business, but maybe, you're a parent. How do you think about managing the two? Or they need like actual physical health. Health. They have physical health that they're maintaining, but they're still building a business. So how do we support all those things? And then the other thing is that we focus on is the go-to-market strategy, particularly with sales. The fundamental idea about a business is one thing: is a customer. If you don't have a customer, you don't have a business. And if you can't scale your customers, you can't scale your business. So we want to make sure that we provide that level of education and support. And also, I just want to say, we don't come into it and say, we know your business more than you do. I'm an investor. If I come in with that perspective, it's very presumptuous and kind of boring of me to say that I know anything. So we say we don't know, but you need to educate us and help us to make sure that you're growing your business to a scale that's meaningful enough for our model, but also for you as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I think some of the statistics that Matt highlighted is reflective of the fact that for entrepreneurs of color particularly, they are over-mentored and underfunded. We saw that in the presentation.
We need
And
t-shirts
so-
like that. Huh?
Absolutely.
I know, right? And so we're looking to address that through both training and capital. And so we have an accelerator called Beta. We are in 8 cities across the country.
How
and we're
many cities? Sorry, I missed
8
that.
cities.
8 cities, wow.
Launching our 9th, Los Angeles, at the end of this month. And we're training individuals on this process of entrepreneurship through acquisition. Because historically, if you didn't go to a top 10 business school, you didn't even hear about this concept. And so we are taking individuals who have the talent and the skill, but need some coaching. And so we're bringing them through a 10-week hybrid accelerator focused on the different aspects of acquiring a business. So valuation, how to structure a deal, how do you find the deal, how to create your investment thesis. Once you found the deal, how do you, negotiate with the seller, all these different components. And then we also have a fund where we're providing capital so that we are not contributing to this concept of entrepreneurs being just getting the mentorship and not getting the capital. And so that's our focus.
And Courtney, can I add? There's something that we also has become an important part of our training model is that, and we have this in partnership with the City of New York, with the Mayor's Office, and also in Tulsa. Yeah, and is that how do you leverage AI tools to actually build?
How many minutes did we get in before we talked about AI? Okay, all right, let's go, Daniel. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's important. So, the program that we ran in Tulsa was also about 15 to 20 entrepreneurs, where we brought in an AI expert, and not just saying like we know AI, but actually help them build with the technical tools. So they leverage, Replit, Cursor, Claude Code to start building things. We had a young lady who was a nurse, and she was like, I have a lot of perspective about how to make certain efficiencies, and we helped her to use these these models to start building, and it was so cool to see how her insight could use it to build a tool that actually is working. Wow. So those are some of the things that we want to do and encourage entrepreneurs to build.
Wow, that's incredible. So now I'm thinking about over-mentored, under-resourced. So I want to underfunded. Let's pick up on that a little bit more. We talked about, and I know that I've had to learn in this work, all of the different types of capital and grant resources that are out there. So if we can get in the dirt a little bit and talk a little bit about the types of capital that are most difficult to access for minority-owned businesses or underserved businesses, and why is that? We'll start with you, Allegra.
Yeah, I'd say philanthropy and loans. So Bankrate.com, they produced an article talking about the loan denial rates among specific subgroups. And you see that reflective of the fact that, irrespective of the entrepreneur's financial capability and their profile, they're still getting denied these critical loans. And from an SBA perspective, majority of our entrepreneurs, they're leveraging the SBA 7A loan. And that is a crucial loan. We see government attacks right now. If you had a green card, you qualified for an SBA loan. Now you do not as of March 1st. And so these are things that are impeding our entrepreneurs from going after an acquisition. Also philanthropy, many philanthropy organizations are not necessarily giving direct grants to small businesses.
Plug for BEF, right?
Exactly. And this is critical, particularly it's very catalytic. It can open the doors for additional partnerships. We've seen certain organizations be catalytic, and for example, something like giving a grant to get a certification that can then unlock federal funding, federal contracts, things like that are typically not necessarily the types of capital that philanthropy is considering. One of our entrepreneurs benefited from a CDFI down payment loan to acquire a business, which is unique. Most CDFIs do not do that. They're not in the acquisition space at all. And so that's an opportunity. But that entrepreneur has gone on to acquire 3 additional businesses in the span of 3 years. And so these things are catalytic, even though they can be hard to reach.
Yeah, incredible. Josie.
Yeah, I'd say in our case, what we see is that there's a layer of barrier for entrepreneurs of color, and that's layered on barriers that cooperatives as a shared ownership structure face just as an entity. So for example, the SBA 7A program is not accessible to cooperatives because of the personal guarantee requirement, as well as other aspects. In a shared ownership model, it's shared ownership. You can't give a personal guarantee. Co-ops are also unable to access usually equity funding because of the expectations from shareholders, of a form of control where, the democratic governance of cooperatives precludes that. And we also see that they can't really access debt from conventional banks. It's not an understood model in this country. And it's perceived as very high risk, even though research has shown that co-ops are actually a very durable way of forming and running a business. They can take a little time to start up. It's a cultural adjustment around democratic governance and shared ownership. But once up and running, they're very resilient. And this ties back to why CFNE and our work around cooperatives is a tool for closing a racial wealth gap. A business that is resilient, that can make it and weather all kinds of economic upturns and downturns, is obviously a better engine for wealth building. Yeah.
Yeah, and you said in this country, which I think is interesting. Who else is doing it better than us?
Well, you
If
know,
there's a long list, we can do a separate
I
event.
think, yeah, I'm a book nerd, I'm a data nerd, and there's some different resources people could look into for the history of cooperatives worldwide. It's a model that is not something that we have invented here. It's something that's existed since humans formed communities. And it has deep, deep roots. Cooperative economic practices have deep, deep roots in Black communities, in different African countries, Latin America, the Middle East, and things like saving circles, lending circles, agricultural cooperatives to get products to market and pool resources for farmers, artisans coming together to be able to sell collectively. Yeah, and so I think it is also, it's a model that is so culturally rooted for people, and it can be done in many different ways. Coming back to the US, we have a movement here in the US of cooperatives that tend to follow a certain more rigid structure. They're formed like regular small businesses. They make a profit, hopefully. But because of that the shared ownership and the collective creation of those cooperatives, they can be infused with many different cultures, many different approaches to commerce and wealth creation.
Thank you. Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I spend a lot of my time in the venture world, but at the same time, there's a connection point, right? To the information that Matt was just sharing on the CDFIs. It's the impact that we're seeing in the capital constraint is just going across multiple environments. And within the venture capital world, Matt showed how Massachusetts is about 0.5% or so of underserved founders that receive venture capital dollars. It's about the same number nationally. And in fact, in 2021, 2022, if we look at where it was about $1.5 billion or so that went to diverse founders, right now, that number is down. Actually, I'm going to ask you all.
Ooh, yes.
How much
Love a
do you
quiz.
think that number is down as of today? Since 2021. 50%, 50%,
Okay, well, that's
50%.
not fair. You're in the industry.
So it's 50% nationally in Massachusetts. Another guess.
Oh,
Massachusetts. 80%. Who said that?
He's in the industry too. I mean,
so he knows it. 80%.
Wow.
80%.
Wow.
So we're seeing this capital constraint of capital that goes to diverse founders, venture capital specifically, decreased by 80%.
Wow.
And nationally is about 50%. So it's an important conversation, and we're feeling it. We're feeling it from the limited partner side, and we're feeling it from the foundation side. We're feeling it from just so many sides. So it's an important conversation. I'm glad we're having this. So then the question is, and that's why we're having this conversation, how do we think about the different modes of capital to connect it all together? And part of our role is to help people to think about it differently, but also help them to think about how do we leverage other pools, other resources, and still be able to operate and build a fantastic business in a capital constrained environment.
Yeah. I want to pick up exactly where you left off, Daniel, which is how to balance that dynamic, because we know, and there's a ton of people in here smarter than me that can explain the function of traditional finance, how important it is to focus on performance and risk avoidance, but all of your organizations, as well as the mission-driven capital ecosystem more broadly, also thinks about long-term impact, trust, and the ability of each of your organizations to narrow the racial wealth gap. So how do you go about balancing that consideration between financial performance and community outcomes? Yeah, I'll start with you, Daniel.
Yeah, financial performance is so critical, right? I think is really important. You're building a business. Business got to perform. It It got to make money. So then there's a cyclicality. As you're making money, you're providing good service to customers, they're coming back and such. That's so important. And for the world I operate in, I also need to see scale so that I can return the money back to the people who gave it to me to invest. And I think about it as there's not necessarily a tension in the financial performance and also in the doing good aspect of it, right? That if you're doing good by your employees, you're doing good by your customers, you're doing good by the community in which you're operating, it will impact the financial performance. But if you're not, you will also see that. So, that's something, an important education with our entrepreneurs, that it goes hand in hand. You can't say, I'm just only gonna do good and forget about operating a really good business. It doesn't work.
Yeah. How about you at New Majority?
Yeah, I'd say it's honestly something I don't think about a lot. I don't think about the balance. And part of the reason is because it's built into the ethos of what we're doing. So for example, we have in our mandate that 10% of the cash flow distributions of any company that we invest in goes to the employees of the business.
Wow.
So built into the model is that the employee of said business that is helping the entrepreneur build their personal wealth. They're also sharing in real-time upside on an annual basis, to build their personal wealth. And then also I think about, when you think about long-term, what we want to see in the ecosystem, we're investing for the long term. And the asset class that we're investing in is one that allows us to not have to think about that balance. So in the ETA space, from an SBA perspective, less than 5% of companies default. And so if I invest in 100 companies, less than 5 of them are gonna go out of business. You don't see that success rate in almost any asset class. And so for that reason, that's part of the reason also that we don't really think about the balance, because it's built into the ecosystem, thankfully, in the companies that we're investing in and how we are mandating that capital be used.
Yeah, thank you.
I think Allegra and Daniel, basically you said it all. And then I just add for CFNE that for us it's also about aligning our capital with our mission. So we are a CDFI, and you covered in the beginning, Matt covered all the amazing things that make the CDFI industry so special. Transformative finance that's centered on people and mission driven. At CFNE, we were founded in 1975 by investors, as I mentioned. And so from the beginning, the majority, almost 3/4 of our loan capital that we use to lend out has come from about 450 individual, mostly investors, and some institutions like foundations. And they are all highly mission aligned. And so it becomes this cycle of support and accountability where we're funded by the community and people who care about these outcomes to give the money and lend the money as almost friends and family capital to people who are doing the work on the ground to form these businesses for wealth creation. And that is kind of how we balance it. Yeah.
And okay, so we're going to get worse before we get better. I want to talk a little bit more of that volatility and instability that Matt's presentation highlighted, in part because, again, much of what he mentioned was on our CDFIs in particular, but you all have told us a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about how this instability from the SBA lending programs to just drops in private and philanthropic capital have affected your work. So if I can start with you, Josie, how has it been something that you at CFNE have been able to navigate this uncertainty at the federal level, but also likely in the different areas in which you work?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the fact that we are a CDFI that gets about 3/4 of our capital from a notes program, so selling private unsecured debt as promissory notes. We have had the really nice situation of not having a direct impact yet on our ability to continue lending. At the same time, it is terrifying, the prospect of losing those grant funds, which, as Matt pointed out at the beginning, are really crucial to us operating and especially growing our programs. And for us, that also means our growth right now and what we're focusing on is to do some field building and ecosystem building to close another gap, not the racial wealth gap entirely, but a gap of entrepreneurs of color being able to access and form cooperatives.
Yeah.
And so that, is an additional thing for us with our mission being focused on cooperatives. And I think maybe folks saw that Project Equity just released a great study on this, where they interviewed Black business owners and Black workers of conventional businesses and Black workers at cooperative businesses in the greater Atlanta region. And there is a gap there, as in the Northeast, that CFNE has seen, in terms of, in that case, Black entrepreneurs not having awareness that cooperatives are an option, and when they do, not really seeing it as a viable option because it feels more risky, and just the daily challenge and grind of running a business is too much to get off that wheel and try this new kind of model. And so in CFNE, we had actually a few years ago conducted our own needs assessment of the region that we work in New England and New York. And we found something really similar, that not just Black communities, but communities of color throughout the Northeast and Indigenous communities were experiencing all of those same things that from the Project Equity study. In addition, they were identifying just the complete, or not complete, but a lack of co-op developers in their communities. And so in our industry, part of the technical assistance that we do that's really important is having developers who are specifically working on helping people form cooperatives, because it is a model that has an education component of how do you structure it, how do you make shared decisions as a worker owner board of a company. And so after doing this needs assessment, CFNE used $800,000 of our own net assets a few years ago to launch a pilot of a Co-op Navigators Fellowship. And the idea is, and I love what you said, Allegra, that there is a gap. The problem isn't mentorship. The problem is access to capital. And so in our case, what we were seeing is the access to capital for cooperatives run by people of color needs to be closed by people from those communities, of those communities who are developing co-ops. And that just right now in New England hasn't been present to the degree that it could. Yeah. And so the Co-op Navigators Fellowship had 5 fellows who are embedded in communities like Providence, where I'm from, Boston, not Boston, Maine, all over, working in Indigenous communities, and basically people who are already doing cooperative economic practices in their communities, funded half-time to have the space and the expansiveness to develop that work, really get down into it and have peer support on it so that they weren't feeling completely alone, organizing these initiatives. And going back to the CDFI fund, that now, we finished our first 3-year pilot. That's the type of work that we won't be able to continue without having robust funding, philanthropic funding, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, I think in this capital constraint environment, it's hard to build a business. But some of the things that I actually find really exciting is the way that entrepreneurs, and I mentioned this, are using AI tools. Because of that, the cost of build have significantly decreased, and the speed at which people are building has increased, right? So when people raise capital with us, or just generally in venture capital, there are a few things that they're thinking about, right? They want to make sure that they're using it to hire employees so that they can increase sales, or they want to use it on product development to make sure that they're making their software, technology, whatever they're building more robust. Now, I was talking to an entrepreneur a few days ago, and he was telling me that he wanted to raise money, but he's going to actually delay in raising money. And I was like, why? It seems like you actually, and I was like, it seems like you actually need to get this. But he's like, no, right now I can deploy 6 agents, AI agents, to do some of the technical builds that he would have hired for, right? And if an engineer's, could be about $200,000 a year, and you multiply that across 600,000, he's saving that right now to deploy AI agents. Now, then it also raises other questions about employment.
It's a different panel, yeah.
Different
Yeah,
things.
we'll focus on.
But the point that I'm making here is that the speed of build has increased and the cost of build has come down. So that gets me excited about how do you build a company in this environment and being creative in solutions. Even if capital is constrained, there are different ways to tap into resources and execute.
Yeah, the question was around capital constraints, right? If I
Yeah,
understand
just the
correctly.
difficulty of this landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of difficulties, particularly because, last year or the year before, a lot of folks that have historically been invested in this space, what we were hearing constantly was, well, we're just going to wait until and see what happens after the election. That was like the line. In my head, I thought about it, and I'm like, what does the election have to do with the work that you're doing? Because, irrespective of what happens, is your organization not going to exist, after the election? And then, really grateful to have partners that are forward and bold in stating the fact that they will continue with their work irrespective of what the federal, administration is doing. So, for example, Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan is one of our partners. He said, at Davos, he's like, we're still doing DEI, right? And that was like a very bold thing to say. When organizations were getting sued left and right, we heard about the CDFI fund being almost demolished. I think foundations particularly have a role to play in leveraging the power of their voice, the power of the collective voice of philanthropy as a whole, to understand that, hey, we are in this for the long term, irrespective of what the government. We're not necessarily beholden to every whim and blow of the government. And I think that is something that is a powerful statement to make in times like these, because we are seeing, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a green card, you no longer are eligible for an SBA 7A loan. And so that's a huge impact for communities, immigrants who have, helped to build this country. And so those are just some of the capital constraints that we're seeing, and we're creating innovative ways to figure out. We're seeing some non-SBA, non-bank lenders emerge that are interested in, getting into this space.
Yeah, and I want to follow up in a few minutes about what role the ecosystem can play in supporting your work. But before we do, I think it's poignant and important for us to highlight all of the important work your institutions are doing, but also bring it down a little bit more and talk about the end user and the businesses that you all are supporting. So I'll start with you, Daniel. Can you just provide examples of grantees or businesses that were not successful or being served more specifically by the traditional markets, but thrived because of the models and the programs that you had them participate in? What did that look like, and what made it possible?
Yeah, in one of the partnerships that I mentioned here with the Bar Foundation, we work with entrepreneurs, about 15 or so. And when the NIH grant was paused, there's a company that we're working with that was expecting to receive, about $1 million or so in an NIH grant to do the work. And we got, a frightened email from her, and she was really devastated. And she was like, do I stop building? Do I lay off all these people? Doing important work, especially in women health, as a women health tech company. And this partnership that we have with the Bar Foundation became very critical, because we're a venture fund, so I can't I can't give grants. I have to invest it and expect a return. But this partnership allowed her to receive a grant from the Bar Foundation, and gave her some money to continue to operate. And eventually things worked out where the government released the funding, but it gave her space to continue to operate. So these tools, the grants, the resources, the collaboration becomes really important as we connect, as I mentioned about connecting capital. And now, she's doing incredible work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier one of our entrepreneurs received a down payment loan from a CDFI. So typically the structure of these deals, the SBA can fund up to 90%. Typically you're seeing 70 to 80%. And so the entrepreneur has to come to the table with that last 10%. And so that's where our fund comes into play. But typically what the banks are doing is we're requiring entrepreneurs to have personal capital to go into the deal. And so what we structured with this entrepreneur, so what that looks like practically, just to explain, if you're buying a $5 million business, you personally might have to come to the table with $500,000. And for the entrepreneurs that we work with, they generally don't have that
Have
sitting
that in the
around.
bank, yeah.
Exactly. And so we were able to structure a deal with the CDFI that provided that down payment capital for the entrepreneur. And they acquired the first Black female-owned insurance brokerage in the country, have since acquired 3 additional insurance companies, creating a holdco. And this is the type of businesses that we're investing in. Insurance, every business needs insurance, irrespective of the economy. And so these are the sort of recession-resistant sort of businesses that need capital, that are, economic engines in our communities. And we have to figure out ways to make these acquisitions possible, irrespective of what's happening on the federal front.
Absolutely. Josie.
I'd love to highlight a recent borrow of ours called Eastern Garage Door. They're in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and they're representative of a trend that we're seeing in the worker co-op world, where conventional businesses that are experiencing potential exits of owners. So as Allegra pointed out, the silver tsunami, which is hitting, the workers can actually buy out the business and transition. Now that is definitely not an easy thing to do, and it takes a lot of willingness from the seller and the workers, and a lot of coordination between them, as well as the right kinds of capital. And so Eastern Garage Door they were founded in about 1930.
Wow.
They were really long-standing kind of Main Street business, so I think really representative of where the silver tsunami is going to hit hard. It's businesses that people know that they love in their communities, that were owned by local families often. But many of those families also were white. And so what we're also seeing with Eastern Garage is this opportunity that, in this case, a majority Dominican and women workforce was able to buy from the selling owner, and they are now running Eastern Garage Door. It's a successful business, and so this is one of the amazing things about this conversion opportunity, is that people are able to walking into it makes it sound simple, but they're able to take over a business that has a successful track record, that has a market share, that's been operating, it has brand recognition in the community. And in many, many cases, this means that there's a transfer of wealth from a sole owner to many owners, so many ownership opportunities grow out of this one, but also a racial wealth transfer, where often white owners are transferring to majority minority workforces. And so Eastern Garage Door, another thing I really love knowing about them is many of those workers who bought it had been there for 20 plus years, in one case since high school. And I also love that the selling owner found out about that opportunity he didn't even know about this opportunity to sell to the workers, and was considering different options like liquidating the business, et cetera. And he found out about the cooperative conversion option at a local Chamber of Commerce event. Wow. And Cooperative Development Institute was there as well talking about it. So it just shows that if you spread the word that this is an option, and if the cooperative development tools and developers are there to support it. And I need to mention that CFNE came in with the capital to help.
You're like, who made that happen?
I know. Yeah. I'm so excited about the accomplishment that they did, because it really was, their work as the workers and the seller. But basically, the gap in the financing there fell between the owner himself was offering his own equity. He also offered, in that case, a subordinate debt, a subordinate note, so that it just shows how meaningful this is, not just for the workers, but for the owners, who aren't losing kind of a legacy. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there was a gap, even with what he was providing and the workers providing their own equity contribution. And CFNE was able to fill that gap with a couple different financial tools, a line of credit, and now they're up and running.
That's great to hear. Thank you all for sharing. Mm-hmm. I have one last question before we open it up to questions, comments, hypothetically, and just discussion with some really great practitioners and leaders in this room. So start thinking about your questions. And the last question, which you guys have been referencing throughout this panel, but we wanted to end on is the role of the private and public ecosystem that supports the work that you all do. So could each of you all explain how public partners, philanthropic partners, private partners, donors can support both entrepreneurs of color, but also the ecosystem of each of your organizations that lead in mission-driven financing? And I'll start with you, Josie.
Sure. And so I'm sitting up here as our capitalization manager, meaning I manage our social notes program, and so that's why I keep coming back to it. But it is a very unique way of financing our work, and it brings together 450 investors who buy notes from us, anywhere from $1,000 to upwards of $2 million. About 65% of those investors are individuals or family trusts. And so, and then the other percentage are a mix of faith-based institutions that are investing, in some cases, their retirement funds, foundations that make PRIs, MRIs, and even cooperatives, when their cash flow allows, they want to, cooperatives are very cooperative, so it's a cycle of money that just keeps regenerating. And I think I've mentioned before, about 3/4 of CFNE's total capital stack comes from those partners. And so that's very meaningful to us. That's where we see our biggest support. I would say that opportunities that we see for other partners to come in, as mentioned, is philanthropic capital to support field building, not just for CFNE, but for all of the organizations that are focused on employee ownership, because it really is such a powerful tool for wealth building. It's so durable, and it has so many knock-on effects, including civic engagement, empowerment, cultural representation, and across the spectrum. So yeah, I'd say that philanthropic dollars for field building feels very important to us right now. I think also I'd just say that for folks who are investors or who advise investors, just centering employee ownership as a lens through which you look at your investment strategy would be incredible. Centering it as a strategy, it's a strategy and a goal. Yeah.
Okay. I like it.
And I'm
Let them out, yeah.
And partnering on actual deals. So the conversion opportunity that I was mentioning, there's not enough capital to do all the conversions that are coming down the pipeline if programs that people are doing to promote those conversions are successful. So we're part of the Northeast Transition Initiative. It is an initiative with about 9 partners, including some who are in the room. I can mention in Boston, there's the Boston Impact Initiative is part of it, Nectar, Community Finance, and the ICA group. It's led by the CDI, the Cooperative Development Institute. And they have just come back from a retreat where they set a really bold goal that they'd like to build a machine, us as partners, to convert 100 businesses per year in the region, the Northeast region, but including many, many in Massachusetts. And so if they're successful in getting to that goal, we are definitely going to need to scale up the number of partners coming in to finance those deals.
Okay. And I got excited. I'm excited to hear more.
Yeah. Two things primarily come to mind. The first thing is that, for our investor base is primarily high net worth individuals, family offices, foundations, corporations. So that's part of the connected capital that becomes really important. So we're always looking to partner up and collaborate with foundations and others. The second thing that comes to mind is, I mentioned examples of some of the work that we're doing with the city of New York, with the mayor's office, or what we're doing in Tulsa and what we're doing in Boston. So for partners to come in and say, let's get creative in how we want to support entrepreneurs. The one in Tulsa, we just wrapped it up. And for me, I keep bringing it up because it was just so cool to see people that I wouldn't have seen as saying, I want to build a tech company. This teacher who's like, I just left my job and I want to do something else. Can I build a tech company? And we helped her to leverage AI tools to go through her ideas. So being creative with different models, we get really excited about, and we'll love to, talk to anybody that's interested.
Interested in creativity. I love it.
Absolutely,
I love it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Alekra, will end with you.
Yeah, for me, I think my answer to that would just be 2 words: move money.
Period.
That's
Okay.
really what it comes down to. So McKinsey did this study that really shocked me last year, where they looked at regions of the country that had the highest communities of color, and they held white wealth constant, and they said it would take from 245 to 800 years to reach parity. And you would think that would send shockwaves in the industry, but it has not.
Really, that's
And-
just a Monday.
Yeah. And I was talking to one of the gentlemen who produced the report, and a friend of mine, we were sitting down, and I said, so you're telling me that my grandchildren's grandchildren will still be discussing this issue, will still be at the same conferences, will still be, wrestling
Having the
with
same
these-
panels.
Exactly. And I think if those of us that are in this space, in philanthropy, in impact investing, look at this from a lifetime view, it's like at the end of my life, I want to say that I was able to help to reduce the wealth gap in my lifetime. And I don't think philanthropy necessarily has that mindset, because we're thinking instead of addressing big problems today, we're gonna withhold capital for and breadcrumb it, in the future. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right thinking that will allow us to address these problems in real time. So I definitely think there needs to be some additional, thought as to how we're deploying capital. We know in philanthropy the gold standard is multi-year unrestricted, hopefully one or the other in many cases. Those are just some of the things that can alleviate these issues and help us to address them in our lifetime, so that we're not having a future where these issues are existing in 1,000 years from now.
In this lifetime. Okay, I think we're going to have to
Awesome.
leave it there. Thank you so much.
That's a great note to end on.
Okay. We have a couple of mic runners in the room and about 12 minutes to have some questions and conversation. I saw a hand up here, and I also see a hand up here. And when you ask your question, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Imami. I work in fundraising consulting and actually was partnering with OFN over the last year. With a tax on the CDFI fund, we didn't really hear you cover a lot of what's happening at the federal level. We heard a little bit about it from Matt at the beginning.
And Matt has a microphone next to him if you want him to answer this question. Yeah.
But sort of as federal dollars are becoming sort of less predictable, how are you distinguishing between sort of balance sheet capital for lending and flexible operating capital for risk absorption? I'm thinking about sort of technical risks, pipeline development, et cetera. And sort of what are you seeing in the ecosystem that funders are being most responsive to underwriting that sort of entire continuum of capital? I'm thinking about sort of like blending market rate debt with philanthropy to create like a subordinated debt line or a below market rate debt. And what are you seeing sort of as funders are being most responsive to that rather than just sort of straight loan capital? Sorry, convoluted question.
Matt, you want to take that?
Yeah. I put
like
him
to
next to the
start.
microphone and
Yeah,
anticipated
you wanna
this.
Yeah.
Briefly comment on the importance of the CDFI Financial Assistance Awards particularly, and to the question around use for operations or for loan capital or for credit enhancement, loan loss reserves, et cetera. One of the most powerful things about that funding is that it is completely unrestricted and multi-year, as Allegra said, to the gold standard elements. And it's what allows those organizations to leverage private capital. So it's absolutely critical. And if you look at the landscape of other funding sources, it is uncommon to meet that gold standard. It's less common. So it's actually a real problem. So to how the institutions are responding, I'll hand it to you all to speak more specifically.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add?
I mean, I think the only thing that I'd add is that a scarcity mindset never helps. And I think in this moment of crisis, especially doesn't help. And I'm thinking specifically about philanthropic dollars. For our organization, loss of the CDFI fund does mean that we will have to slow growth on the programs that help us do things like focus on closing the gap of entrepreneurs of color who want to start co-ops and are operating our growth in those areas. And as a result, the tendency is to want to pivot and look for more philanthropic dollars from other sources. And so the trouble with that is everyone is in crisis right now. And I think people in this room are very familiar with the fact that philanthropy is strained by that. That's another panel for another time. But so at CFNE, basically, I think what we're pivoting to is going back to our roots and saying, look, we were founded as a community loan fund, money from people in the community who provided our loan capital. I think what we're doing now is pivoting to look at our operating dollars and our charitable dollars that we need in a similar way. And so, I came on to CFNE with a background in nonprofit fundraising, so it comes maybe more naturally to me. I think the CDFI industry in general could also benefit from having that kind of 501c3 mindset that it's for all of us to support. We have a lot of wealth in our communities, and just grassroots donations help. And so I think, just kind of going back to those fundamentals of fundraising, like every dollar counts. Let's start a membership program. Let's do some events. It's a lot of work, and I know that coming from the 501c3 fundraising world, I know that that's easier said than done. But I also like to be on brand for co-ops. I like the self-reliance that generates, because I do think our government should be activated to do more for us. At the same time, self-determination and autonomy helps us weather when they're not going to be there for us.
Yeah, that's true. So I think I'm going to, with your permission, take on this other question and then go down. Yeah. Thank you, Kathy.
My name's Lucas Orweg. I'm in the Mass Mutual Foundation. I'm curious, to Allega's point about just moving money. A little detail on how would you like us to move that money?
Oh, I love this question.
I'm looking at, there was the map up there with all of the different CDFIs across the state. Do we need to have a robust ecosystem? Do we need for those existing organizations to grow? Do we need more CDFIs in more neighborhoods, in more sectors? And how would you like funders to coordinate amongst ourselves to really build out this ecosystem?
Yeah. Excellent question. Who wants to tackle it?
I can start. From our world and seeing how money is moved, particularly the money comes from the limited partners, and it goes to us and other investors. And if you look at the metrics right now, or just the stats right now, about 10 funds receive 50% of LP money, right? So there's that concentration of capital, and those 10 funds have been around for a long time, and they're massive now as more of a asset aggregators. So then how could we make sure that other folks are getting that resource as well to deploy into communities and such, and other entrepreneurs who are overlooked, and so it becomes an important conversation for us to say, like, well, LPs, where are you putting your money? Are you thinking about other ways? Are you thinking about other channels where there are also attractive returns and significant impact? So that's a challenge that I also pose to the folks who are distributing the money.
Yeah, I'd say I never get this question, so.
Yeah, I was about to say, see, come to the
Thank you
Boston
for that.
Foundation.
I'd say, at NMC, we take in both grants and investments. We have a fund. The fund is backed by MetLife and Skoll Foundation, and then we take in grants to run our programming. I'd say, in terms of how you should move the money, so typically philanthropy organizations have specific priorities. What are your priorities? And are the grantees that you have currently meeting those priorities? If so, double down, right? I don't see any harm in doing that. So that's one way. And then two, looking at other opportunities that will accelerate the impact that you want to achieve. So that's part of the reason some of our grant making partners have joined with us, because they see the direct benefit of an entrepreneur acquiring a business. That person can go from making $40,000 to making 6 figures plus equity in a business in a 12-month time frame. That's like generally unheard of in other sort of realms. And so I'd say, NMC, we are open for business. Happy to chat with you after. But also, to Daniel's point, the ecosystem needs more capital. So we've seen that where, current fund managers or current LPs will say, well, we haven't tried this thing before. We don't know how it's going to work out. And so instead, we're going to give to the other funds that we've given to, irrespective of performance. So even if they're not performing, I've heard folks say, well, I'm not going to get fired because our consultant said we're going to do this. So that sort of thinking, I think, needs to also change.
I think I'll take one more question.
Hi, good morning. Emily Haber, Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. This has been a fantastic panel, such an interesting conversation. And I just wanted to maybe lift up something, not lift up is probably not the right word, that Allegra said. So Jari and I were just on a call yesterday with regional SBA, and this issue as of 2 days ago were only businesses that are 100% owned by U.S. citizens can access those resources. I mean, this has been a trickle, right? Like it started first with, had to be 51%, and now we're at 100%. So I'm curious about what you're anticipating in terms of the impact on the businesses that you support, how we might be thinking about this, how we need to advocate at the state level around this issue, because it seems like it can really affect the ability for immigrants to establish themselves in this country, and then it just becomes a vicious cycle. So just any perspective on that, I appreciate it.
Great question. What a way to end.
I mean, I could just say quickly, I think, at the state and local governments, it's very generally easy for state and local governments to start funds that can then support immigrant business owners. I think that is one way to combat what we're seeing on the federal level, because they frankly will not be able to access those federal dollars. So that's one way that they can start. We're seeing non-bank, non-lending, typical lending structures come about to address that issue, because from a bank's perspective, they are looking at the financials of the company. Does this business cash flow? And so the owner, where the owner was born, generally does not play, a significant role in terms of whether or not the business has or will cash flow. And so I think that is one opportunity for, our state and local governments.
Great. Thank you.
I'm an immigrant. I was born in Ghana. I grew up in New York. I came here when I was about 6 years old. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Brandeis, and Courtney and I are both Posse students. Yeah. Posse was a game changer for me, and I have several members in my family who are small business owners who are also immigrants. I think the fabric of America is the connectivity amongst all of us, right? Regardless of where we were born. So I think it's for me personally, it's devastating to see those new policies. And I think there are things that we all can do to push. Is number one, to vote, with midterms elections coming up, to just participate and engage in civic duties. And then the second thing here is also that I love what you said about building a business here is just the returns of the cash flow is like the thing. So if folks are, as they're thinking about capital and building the businesses, finding alternative ways to say, like, all right, if I'm not going to get it because of this policy, is there a way to be creative? And I keep coming to this term creative because it's hard to be creative, but also we must be creative in these challenging, constrained times. Some of the best companies that we're seeing out there right now were founded in 2007, 2008. In moments of financial crisis, right? With right now, Meta is massive. Amazon was started around in the 1990s to early 2000s. It's just like the creativity. We need to get creative in moments like this. And also as an immigrant, I'm like, let's go. We're going to perform. We're going to show the numbers. We're going to show that we're going to build a great business regardless of environment.
I think you both said it all.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our Thank you to all of you. Speak with each other, take some food on the way out, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh,
Oh,
you
this
did
is
so
such a
well,
good-
Courtney.